Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Welcome, everybody, to today's Building My Legacy podcast. I have with me today Chris Masiello. Chris, did I pronounce it correctly?
You did, Lois. Great to be with you and your community. Thank you.
Okay, great to have you. I am delighted to have Chris. He has just finished writing a book called Change, Short and Simple. He's spent a lot of time thinking about change, and I find that fascinating because coming out of COVID, I hear over and over again, Chris, people saying, that was a lot of change. I hope we don't go through that again, right? And yet that's kind of part of life. So would you mind sharing with the audience why change, how you got into that, and what you bring to people from what you've learned? Before you do that, let me just share a little bit about your background as well. Chris has a number of companies that he's a part of. Real estate is one of them. He does consulting, and he also has a family business that he's been a part of that's an insurance. But within his business, it's about a $2 billion plus business, so a sizable business, a person who understands, knows what goes into business, and certainly from that background, you understand change. So with that, how did you get into it?
Thank you. Again, great to be here. As you and I were talking earlier, I enjoy history, and I'm always fascinated about the fact that as a species, we're adverse to change, but yet change is how we got here, and change is actually how we're going to get to wherever it is we're supposed to be. And being in a number of businesses, I've been very fortunate over the years to work with, large groups of people, small groups, one-on-one coaching. And, one of the things that really strikes you when you work with people is sometimes we get trapped really in our own thought process. And what happens is we get trapped in the paradigms that we know, and it gets in the way of our curiosity. And I think change and curiosity are connected really at a level that really doesn't get exposed very much. So when we think about change and we think about how hard it is for us, we all come here hardwired for it. We're all hardwired to be adverse to change. Now it goes back to our fight or flight instincts, and our fight or flight instincts, really were our survival instincts, where if there is a change in our environment, it could have been, the forest goes silent, or the birds are flying away, or whatever the case may be. We would start scanning for threats, and we've just had that as our survival instinct. So even today, where we don't face some of the environmentally more treacherous things that our ancestors did, still, when there's a change in our environment, our system doesn't know the difference. Wow. So we get triggered. We get triggered into fight or flight, which means it's not a time for creativity. It's not a time for curiosity, and it could be something just as simple as I have to go to a meeting and sit next to somebody that I don't like, or who I feel doesn't respect me, whatever the case may be, or I have to be at a family event. I got to be with a family member that I'm not all that crazy about, and that drops us into our fight or flight response, and that's when we start to lose our creativity. We start scanning for threats, and so that's always fascinated me about, well, why is change so hard when it's kind of the only constant we really know? And so that's where the book came from. And I've been really fortunate. My philosophy is every time that I get to work with somebody, it's also an opportunity to work on myself. And so
Oh,
I've had
wow.
I've had some really amazing teachers in that way.
If you're honest as a coach and a consultant, that is so true. That every time you help somebody, it's like putting a flashlight on yourself and
Very
highlighting
much.
that you want. I think the hard thing for people many times to accept what we have to offer, Chris, is there's that fear of, something I don't know. And there's that fear of how will you view me? But if we're in that learning mode ourselves, it takes that fear away because we're just like them. We're in the same boat, so to speak, learning and growing.
Yeah. Over the years, I'm a journaler. So over the years, I compiled different strategies that either I came up with or I was taught or I learned through working with teams and individuals on change strategies. And again, I think the first one is to understand we all come by it naturally. So no judgment. And then from a state of no judgment, then how do we, what are the change strategies that we can deploy so that we can navigate things and get back to curiosity. One of them is just that, being really curious about, well, what's going on around me. I don't have to judge it. I don't have to rush to any opinions. We can just kind of watch and see how things unfold. We can scan for the opportunity, not for the threat. And I think over the years that's one of the things that I've really learned the most about when we're dealing with change. Like when change occurs, there's the opportunity. And I won't get this translation exactly right, so hope your audience will forgive me. But the Chinese symbol for chaos and opportunity is the same, and there's a reason for that, because chaos is the opportunity. And so if you think about change that way, when the environment's changing around us, well, where's the opportunity? Because the world, change by its nature is leaving what you know for what you don't know. And I always think that's kind of fascinating too, because all the opportunities that we have are not in the defined space. They're all in the undefined space. But yet, as a species, again, because we're hardwired for fight or flight and security first, which, we're hardwired for survival, being in an environment that's defined, of course, has its appeal. Even if it's an environment we don't like. I mean, that's how people stay in circumstances that are not really advantageous for them, whether it's professional or personal, is they get kind of trapped into what they know because it's what they know, and they're kind of afraid about, how do I move into space that I'm not familiar with, and what does that look like? But again, if you're going to scan for the opportunities, well, the opportunity is the space you're in today. That's what you know. It's unlikely that it's going to get a whole lot better. Where you're going to better your stead is in that kind of blank space of creativity.
That blank space of creativity. I am fascinated by your comment about curiosity, because I was in a group of HR sort of thinkers about what's happening in our organizations and with our employees. And one of the comments that was made by one of the people was, we were talking especially about some of the D&I initiatives. And he said, for him, the real issue was, are we curious? Because if we're curious about one another, in his view, it solves some of those human misunderstandings.
Absolutely. Well, you can't be in judgment and curiosity at the same time.
Oh, interesting.
So think about it. Think about it in terms like that. So if I'm judging something, I'm not learning. That's it. I've made my opinion. I've come to my own conclusion if I'm in judgment. And I think that's the difference, the juxtaposition of curiosity to judgment. So if I'm in judgment, I've already made a decision. So we'll just take a thing, right? So something in my life has changed. And if I rush to say it's bad, Well, you've labeled it. And I tend to look at things. I've learned to understand that things are what we label them. So we could take something that I mean, there's certainly some things that, of course, are unfortunate in life. Aside from those, if we take something and we label it as well, that's not good. Well, that's never going to work. You know how the language goes. Well, we're in judgment. And what's happened is we've choked off all the opportunity for creativity and all the opportunity to be able to look at it, from curiosity. And so, well, wait a minute, what happens if we did this? What happens if we did that? And I'm always drawn to the Thomas Edison quote, where it took him 1,000 times to get the incandescent light bulb right, and he said, "No, I just found 1,000 ways how not to do it." And he just kept going. So I think it's the curiosity, is that not being in judgment, because once we label something and we get it into our mind, it takes a little bit to unwind it. And a lot of times the things that are presented to us, but on the surface might look, maybe so radically different than what we know, that we immediately do a rush to judgment, and then that's it. And we're stuck.
And we're stuck then, aren't we? Chris, you have this large corporate presence. You're in several states. You have a large number of employees. So you deal with, in your own situation, with people needing to change. You're adapting your business to change. So let's start with your business. What were some of the big changes you had to go through because of COVID and then following COVID?
Well, so ironically, in our real estate practice, we had actually had our largest. So this would be in March of 2020, and I had just gotten over COVID. So I had been in New York City like the end of February, and I came home and I was out, and it hadn't really mainstreamed fully yet. So I wasn't really, I wasn't like aware that I had COVID. And then as soon as I got out of it, then all of a sudden it hit. And we at the time had our largest number of pending sales, or families looking to move into their new homes. So we had 1,000. We had 1,000 families getting ready to move into their new homes. And when COVID first hit, of course, we operate primarily in 4 states, and the emergency management teams for each state, of course, they had never managed a pandemic before either, and so we ended up initially not on the provider list that was allowed to stay open, and so we had to navigate that. And through our trade associations and some of our contacts, kind of remind the powers to be that you want people moving into their new houses, because you don't want to be stacking generations in homes during a pandemic. And then it was so we had to go through kind of like those basic kind of root level issues, and then we realized really early on, Lois, that we needed to come up with a mechanism where that we could communicate with a very high level of transparency on giving people updates and walking people through what was happening, what they could anticipate. Here's what this means. So we dropped down into a couple strategies. One was we did a company-wide call every Tuesday morning and Thursday morning for an hour.
And for how many employees?
Well, there's 1,000 people in our organization all in.
So that's a lot of people to have on a call. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't get everybody, of course, but people would rotate through. And so and then we would just, here's what we know. We would just talk about it. Again, no judgment. Here's what's happening. Here's what we have to pay attention to. I think one of the key things that we were able to kind of convey to everybody is that this is just a moment in time. This isn't permanent. We have to get through where we are. There was some feeling that, oh, this will be over in weeks. We were pretty specific with people. This isn't going to be over in weeks. So we need to be thinking about this in terms of 12 to 18 months. That's kind of how we phrased it to everybody, that we would have, some version of these measures with, masks, and we had to wear masks, gloves, boots, all that stuff, when we were in people's homes, justifiably. Then the other thing we did was we started something called Mindful Mondays, which included some of the content in my book, and it was basically about helping everybody, at the beginning of the week, what's the mindset for the week. And so we would talk about things like we were just talking about curiosity, judgment, and that's continued to this day, actually. So it's something now that's become cultural for us, that I record a Mindful Monday every week now. And it was about communicating, and then and not talking at people. It was two-way communication. Our Tuesdays and Thursday forums were open. They were open. There was Zoom. Not everyone was used to Zoom yet, so we had some pretty funny moments. We as an organization have been using Zoom since it first came out. So when COVID hit, and we have a 5.5 hour distance in our footprint from one of our facilities to another, so we're kind of used to leveraging technology to kind of shorten the distance between offices and bring people together. But first we realized we had to orientate everyone to like Zoom and maybe some etiquette, and then once we got a rhythm around it, it didn't take long. Then it was a lot of two-way conversation, but it was really about creating a forum so that people could say what was on their mind, and no judgment. And what are you worried about? What are you afraid of? As you're talking to your clients, what are they afraid of? All those types of things. It was a powerful time.
So did you learn things about, let's start with clients, that you didn't know before because of those conversations?
Yeah, anytime you have a client-based relationship, you kind of naturally absorb some of their energy. It's just human nature. And at the beginning there was some panic. Why wouldn't there be? And so it was really about allowing our folks the opportunity to kind of vent and strategize, sort of off gas the energy, and give them a kind of a testing ground, for us to be able to talk through dialogue and strategies, and about some very specific about client needs, and some just about making sense of the environment. And I think if I were to boil it all down to the strategies that we deployed, and some of which have really become cultural out of COVID, you talk about opportunities, that we spent the bulk of our time helping people make sense of the environment. And then that rubbed off on our clients. So I think what was really impressive is just generally, even like the level of fear out there, which you can imagine, there was still a lot of humanity, a lot of goodwill, people really coming together, and it was very moving at times.
Has that continued?
It has, and we have a very rich culture, and it is a very open culture. It's certainly not perfect, but it really got strengthened during COVID, and a lot of the things that we started in COVID continued to this day. Again, sense making. Markets are shifting. We're still, in a business sense, we're just in the echoes of the post-COVID process. I mean, we're not. I think it's probably a different topic, but I think it's so fascinating that we talk about things like inflation. Well, of course you're going to have inflation. You still have supply chain issues. We paid people to stay home. I mean, I don't like why is inflation a surprise? And I know it's not a good thing, but we're not even a year out of this. and so, we're still using, a lot of those strategies that we used during the pandemic, because in essence, the side effects of the pandemic continue.
Yeah. And we have a new strain, right? So we're told it's not going to be over fast. So how do we adapt? How do we find, in the midst of the uncertainty, what feels sometimes like a little bit of a chaotic system, how do we find opportunity? So part of what I hear you say is curiosity. How can people become or develop their curiosity skill?
Well, again, I think it goes back to judgment and being aware, and there's a process called metacognition, and kind of in lay terms, it's the process of thinking about what you're thinking about. So it's about being aware of your thoughts. Now, this is widely used statistic, but the average person somewhere has between 60 and 80,000 thoughts a day. So you can't monitor 80,000 thoughts a day, but you can monitor the ones you're aware of. You can monitor the ones that are related to something that you've got to deal with or something you want to change. So I think that's the first step, is owning your thinking. Owning your thoughts. Don't let a thought slip by that you don't want. You're not going to catch all of them because there's thousands, but you can catch the ones that matter. And then using that process to, one thought at a time, correct your thinking. And it can be an interesting process because let's just say that I'm an early riser. This is me. I am an early riser and I go to the gym. But there are mornings when the alarm goes off where I'm really not that excited about it. And so my first thought is, the mornings I'm not all that excited about it, my first thought is, my brain will talk me into why I should stay in bed. And I have to override that thought, but I have to be aware of it. So I think that's the first thing, is being aware of what you're thinking about and correcting the thoughts so that your thoughts are in alignment with the outcome you want. And that is a thought by thought process until it's not. And roughly it's 4 to 6 weeks for people to develop habits. And I always look at it in terms of either you're developing a habit or you're dissolving a habit, because a habit is created through the constant synaptic connections, right? And the wiring in our neurosystem, in our neuronet. And so we have to work at it long enough that we can actually rewire ourselves. And I think that's the first thing, is really being aware of your thought process and making sure that as many thoughts as you can get a hold of are in alignment with what you want.
So you have a process where you're looking at the metacognition. You have a process also for bringing about change and dealing with change. Similar, or what's that process that you use for change?
Certainly starting with what's my vision, and we want to make sure that our thoughts are fully aligned with our vision. And we're all wired a little differently. So no, I'm always a little reluctant to say, well, I got to do these 5 things, because they could be slightly different for everybody. But I one example I like about how we kind of fluently operate with change, but we don't know it, is driving at night. So we drive. So and I put this in the curiosity category. It doesn't fit neatly in there, but let me get through it. Is that, so be curious about the fact that I get in my car, I drive at night. The distance doesn't matter. It could be 20 minutes, it could be an hour. Right? And I can only see maybe a couple hundred feet in front of me at a time, maybe a little less, depending on weather conditions. And I traverse corners. I go over mountains. I I have a navigation system I'm listening to. I can't see, but I don't really think anything of it. And so curiosity. So I would challenge people to be curious as to like, well, how can you drive at night? Because you can't see what's in front of you, but you're perfectly secure in driving. And so you don't always need to know what's coming next, is the point of it. That's the curiosity. Okay. You don't always need to know, right? You know, like I want to drive. I'm in New Hampshire. I want to drive from New Hampshire to Vermont. I live on the Vermont border. Okay. So I don't need to know like everything that's in front of me. I just know that I want to go to this town in Vermont, and I'll navigate my way there through. And if I'm doing it at night, most of us are pretty confident about driving at night. We don't think much of it. We got nice roads. We got headlights. And then something happens along the way, a deer runs in front of us, or I don't know, there's road construction, or whatever the case may be. Well, we'll figure it out. And I think not getting trapped. I think one of the first strategies, once we understand that we have to own our thinking, one of the strategies is to get comfortable with the fact that you don't always need to know.
You don't need to know. Yeah.
This soft technology that we use, our brain and our body, is pretty amazing, and it will figure it out. And I think that fear of the unknown it is really what traps people. But when you drive at night, it's pretty much an unknown, and you don't think anything of it. So why is that? Why can I drive at night? And it's because your subconscious mind knows how to do it, and it doesn't think anything of it. So if we can train our subconscious mind to deal with change the same way we drive at night, then that's a really good beginning strategy to being able to get on the other side of our fear of change.
Wow, what a great analogy that is. Let me just ask you, with what you've done in all the different businesses that you've been involved in, as you look back and you look at some of that, what do you think will be your legacy? What will you leave behind?
Well, it's kind of a humbling question. I hope I go to work every day, trying to make a difference for the people I get to go to work with. And you and I were talking before, we tend to operate not in a very hierarchical system. We tend to operate in a very relational way with each other. And we look at the people that we work with. They're people first, and they're members of the organization second. And no matter where you go, there you are. So we want to create an environment that, and we're always striving towards it. It'll never be perfect. It will never really be the way we want it. But as the football coach Vince Lombardi said, we're gonna chase perfection, and along the way we're going to find excellence. And I kind of look at it that way, that we're always creating an environment where that the individual comes here, they're respected, they learn, they feel good about themselves, and whatever they take out of our environment, they bring with them no matter where they go, whether they're with their family or friends. And so I hope that legacy of an environment where that people come and go, and that they're better off than before they got there.
That sense of being better off, even when they go someplace else and they're taking that learning with, that is a valuable perspective, because when you have that perspective, it shifts a lot of things in terms of what you do.
Scarcity or abundance. So if I don't want to share with you because I think you're going to leave 5 years from now, or 10 years, pick whatever it is, right? So if I don't want to share with you, then that's scarcity. And it's going to limit what we can do together. If I'm willing to, again, within reason and not violating anyone's privacy, but if I'm willing to share with you the most of what I know, give you 100%, well, now we're all in abundance. And we're going to make the most of our time together. And so I think it goes back to that. It goes back to that kind of mindset, right? If I'm going to hold back from you, you're going to hold back from me. If I'm going to give you everything, you're more apt to give me everything. And then that's how we get great outcomes.
I love that perspective. If we give in a world of abundance, we get back in a world of abundance as well. What have we missed? What have we left out, Chris, that our audience should know?
Well, thank you for that. I kind of go back to what we started about change and about being aware of the fact that again, we all come by this resistance naturally, so we should just own it and maybe take a look at our past experiences and kind of understand that it's not really our unknown future that we get nervous about or apprehensive about. It's really kind of our known past, where that I had this thing happen to me. I don't know what I'm just making this up, right? But I had this thing that happened to me, and I didn't like the way it turned out. And so, then I look down the road, and I get this other similar thing that's going to happen. Like, I don't want anything to do with that again. And so, a lot of times, it's really how we characterize the past and how we project it into the future. And in many cases, they're just not related.
Right.
So think about all the creativity, everything new, and anything that's going to enrich you, okay, is most likely in a space that you've not been before. And you want to keep going just a little bit into that space, a little bit, and a little bit. And that's where you find all the cool stuff.
And that's where you find I love that. That's where you find the cool stuff. Thank you so much, Chris, for being with us and for sharing your wisdom, what you've learned through all of your experiences. For those of you who are listening, we will have information about Chris in our show notes so you can be in contact with him. We encourage you to do that. We will also have information about his book, Change, Short and Simple. Please go to Amazon or your favorite bookstore and pick up a copy. I think you might find his process very interesting. So, Chris, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It was great to be with you and great to be with your community.
And for those of you who are listening today, thank you for being with us. Remember to visit our website at www.buildtomorrow with the number 2 and our newest website, startwithcollaboration.com. Thank you.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.